one of the kind of things we've seen in the last couple of years is some of these sort of single writer shows that have sprung up. In Downton Abbey, Julian Fellowes writes every episode. True Detective, one guy wrote I can't pronounce his last name or I would say it, wrote every episode. Noah essentially wrote every episode of Fargo. What does that say about what's happening with kind of the current state of drama, and what does it mean for writers?
Writers are writing really fast.
Or put another way, Noah, why do you hate other writers?
It's a product of time, really. I mean, the whole TV model, the multiple writer model, I mean, is based on two things. One, obviously, is the more ideas, the better, and the other is you just can't write and produce television at the same time. So you need people to be writing while you're shooting. And for me, I wrote the first episode, and FX picked us up straight to series in I knew in February that I was going, and I knew that I couldn't shoot until November at least. So, and it was such a specific voice, that Cohen thing, that I thought I had the time to do it, and I was happy to do it. I mean, I don't feel like Bill does, that writing is painful and you should hate every minute. I love the process. So. But I did hire 4 writers in the room to help me break all the episodes, because I do think it's really valuable, not just to motivate you, but also to bounce ideas around and all that. So, and then I just, I went off and wrote after we broke them all.
Yeah, I feel that really the cable model has made this possible. Coming off my very first show, which was 22 episodes, those last like 7 just break you. They just mess you up. It's like, at about 17, you're like, why did we do this? There's no reason. This show can't continue, clearly. But suddenly, I went from 22 to 16 and now to 13. And 13, you start to get to that point where, you can conceivably do it yourself. And, not that I would. I kind of have a reverse model. I like to get in there and break everything with the guys. And then I think if I can sit there with my writers and be very, very specific, I can sort of send them off and then, rely on a voice pass, and you get pretty darn close.
It's also a European model, because you're talking about all the episodes being completed, or written at least, before you go into production. We do 25 episodes a year. It would be impossible to write all those episodes before cameras started rolling. So it's a luxury, and obviously cable is allowing and affording people. This is an incredible opportunity for people to be able to have just the time, because once we're in production, there are other things that start to eat at the writer's time.
Is it, I mean, this came up in the context of The Good Wife this year did an Emmy mailer, which was, they basically laid out the 22 episodes they did against the 7 for a half season of Mad Men and 8 for True Detective, and we're kind of trying to show that they had, we do it, good food at reasonable prices, kind of.
The Marie Callender's route.
Is it a different animal in a sense? I mean, Rob, when you're doing 22?
Yeah, I got a kick out of that mailer, having just wrapped up 24 for CBS in the same season. I take the point, but I mean, I just as a viewer of television, not someone who works in the industry, I've gotten to the point where there are lovely apples and lovely oranges. I've often wondered, like, would the Emmy system be more interesting with short form voting and long form voting, and stick to let's look at what's really great for 13 episodes and under, and see.
That's a really good idea.
Any Emmy personnel out there tonight?
Yeah, well,
no, not so much. No.
Yeah, well, I think too something interesting is that viewing patterns have changed. Like, if you're doing 22 episodes, maybe your hardcore fans might see maybe 1 out of 3. But now, I mean, people they'll go on Netflix, they'll go on, they'll go on iTunes, and they'll watch all of it. So suddenly, having that consistent voice, I think, is so much more important.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about arcing toward the end of a show now, which has become, and Erin, you're obviously going to get drafted. I don't expect any big revelations, but since Lost, that's become, very popular. Just Erin and anybody else who's been working on things that you can kind of see an end on. What's it been like having that end date set and being able to work toward it?
Well, being able to have the ending and knowing that you're finished leaves this, I guess, really great moment for the writers, because you're finishing your series and you know exactly what's going to happen, and there's never going to be any stories after that, so you're going to throw everything you have left. Whereas on previous seasons, maybe you're like, oh, next season, we'll do that next season. You also, like, we had an interesting thing where it's a 14-episode season, but 7 are just aired now. 7 are airing next year. So we had to, like, really choose, because you still have to do 7 and 7, even though we're doing all 14 at the same time. We had to really choose what was the most important stories to tell. And that was really, I think, great for us in a weird way for our last season, because it gave us a new challenge.
You know, I think I'm starting the final season of Parenthood now, and we have 13 episodes. So it's a little bit closer to the cable model than the normal network model. And you know, I think, you know, the first thing I said to the writers when we started the room last week was, you know, what a gift this is to be able to give, you know, the show an ending, because there's so, especially I think in the network world, you know, you often don't know. You know, you're doing, you know, a season, and you don't know whether it's going to be the last season, and you have to sort of hedge your bets. And so to be able to, you know, give the show the ending that, you know, you want to give it and that you feel is the best thing is, I think it's great not only for the people doing it, I think it's sort of really good for television, because I think that the idea that the fans of the show are able to, you know, feel like they have been told the entire story and that they get a real ending is, it's kind of like, you know, it fulfills a contract that, you know, you have with the people who watch the show. So I think it's a great thing to be able to know before you know, when you're actually going to your last season, especially if you know at the beginning when you're starting to break those stories.
We have all these kinds of other names now for different forms of doing it, which is, there are several series coming on this year referred to as limited series. But with the, presumably with the understanding that in success, they're really not going to be very limited. So what does that do to the writing process? I mean, does it feel like sort of, you know, all bets are off in terms of you don't have to develop a concept and look at it and go, oh, and here's what we'll do in season 6?
Well, I mean, for me, it's you know, I made a 10-hour movie, and so my ending started on page 1. You know, like I knew that this was a complete story. You know, and I think that it's really exciting in this day and age that the length of the story dictates the length of the show as opposed to the other way around. You talked about Lost. I mean, obviously those guys had a finite amount of story and were forced to stretch it out over a period of time. If it was today and they came in and said, look, they'll crash on the island and we got about 3 seasons in us, and it would be great. Let's do that, you know. So, you know, so for me, that was the really exciting part. You know, I mean, Billy Bob Thornton signed on to do the movie, and he said, you know, I don't have to sign a 7-year contract. And it used to be for writers that 6 seasons in a movie thing. I mean, that's the holy grail. It's right. Your series goes 8, 10 seasons, it's set for life. I don't want to do the same thing 10 years in a row. You know, I think it's an exciting time for writers where that doesn't have to be the model. You can do something short-lived that's critically acclaimed and then go off and do something else. I think that's it's riskier. I mean, you have to continually come up with new stories, but I find that exciting.
We took our lead from a book, and the novels that were written, I don't think the author of those novels anticipated writing 10 of them. It was the success of the books. I think she wrote 1, and I think it sold well, and I think then they contracted 3 more. And we don't really, we pay some allegiance to the books. We can't be so close because we use up the material very quickly with television use of novel in 2 episodes often. So there's a lot of plot. But I think you have to also know that you may have something in mind, but things are going to evolve, and that's part of the evolution of a long-time series. There are relationships you can't anticipate, the relationships between audience members and characters. So that suddenly that character becomes salient in the series when they weren't when you began.
How many of you have actually binged a show, gone through and binged all the way? Was that a yes or a no? I think it was a yes.
I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear it, yeah.
Okay. And something that you literally watched all the way through from beginning to end over a weekend.
Yeah, all of Breaking Bad in 2 months.
Wow.
Too little.
You know, I thought a lot about it when I was writing and breaking the show, and even talking to the composer about how you end acts, and the idea that someone's going to watch it with commercials, and someone's going to watch it where the commercials are not there, and they're going to go from the act out to the act in, and how it's going to play in posterity, and people are going to binge watch it, and Fargo's a sort of deconstructed narrative, because we do these digressions, we do these sort of cold opens, or we'll start, we'll jump back in time, or I like to foster a sort of sense of disorientation. So if you are binge watching, the next episode starts and suddenly you don't know where you are. Like you leave a guy in a jail cell with the two guys he's been trying to avoid, and then you come back and you're not in that scene. You're seeing how he got, you're showing a piece of the narrative that might not linearly be the next piece, but it informs the story. So I like that idea of taking the structure of it apart and teasing people in that way, and the idea of unpredictability or a slight disorientation, I think, really adds to people's enjoyment, because people are so smart now, and they're so able to predict narrative that they're 5 seconds into a scene, they're like, oh, he's dead, and he's gonna sleep with his mother, or whatever the story is, and what I like to create a narrative that's both unpredictable and then in the end inevitable, but that's not an easy thing to do.
We're seeing shows that are getting smaller audiences, but enormously loyal, rabid fan bases. How cognizant are you of those fan bases while you're doing the show, and can you interact with them and listen to them without it leading the road to madness?
I was really big on Twitter, especially with White Collar, and the great thing about it was, I got on Twitter because the kids are doing it, want to know what it was about, and just the power of that hashtag. I'd start watching the show, and to be able to, watch the show live, hashtag, White Collar, and be able to watch, it was like going to the dial test literally every week, but it was free. But yeah, you could literally see what was working and what wasn't working, and that was incredibly powerful. The scary part became when you start interacting with the fans, and I love some of our fans, and they love me. And it was, some are very nice and stuff, but you get some of those, slightly rabid, crazy fans that, it gets a little intense sometimes, especially for the cast, obviously. But I think it's very powerful. I mean, to be able to interact that quickly and to get that immediate feedback, at least for us, was incredibly useful, just to see what was working and what wasn't immediately.
I was the last person to tweet on our staff. I was forced at gunpoint last year because the show has such a high profile in social media, and it's a big part of how we promote the show now too. I think everyone knows that with a young audience, and they watch television in a different way than we did, because those of us who sweat over lines and want dialogue to be heard still can't conceive of how people are doing this while they're watching your show, because that's called talking during the show. And you tell them to shut up in the theater and listen. So, but there's a different way of consuming now. We accept that, we embrace it. Of course, the first time I tweeted, I didn't realize that I was on, my capital letters were locked. So people were like, why are you screaming at us? Why are you? So I immediately took, it's hard when you're not technologically savvy. So, I can't even make ice. So I really don't want to be put in those positions where I have to communicate with people I don't know. But you have to.
I think they do. As I recall, your show is, they're constantly saying the most tweeted about show on television.
It
right?
is. It starts like at midnight, in anticipation of tonight's episode was our premiere of the 5th season, and it started, I guess, I'm told by our lovely staff that, it started at midnight trending, and that's off of just some previews people saw. We also have real tight security now as far as our scripts, and things are watermarked, and CIA has to take them over to the network, and it has to be, it's a very, clouds. You got to take things out of clouds. You can't just email things.
Did you guys
to
have
people.
security? Did people
We
grab
did.
stuff?
We did. We had 2 scripts that were on the internet, and one of them was the finale. So
Do you know how they got out?
They don't really know still. They don't. It was taken from the writer's, script coordinator's computer, but it wasn't the script coordinator. We were actually on hiatus at the time.
Anybody else on that, or just interacting with the fan base?
Mad Men, I think you guys would get it all the time.
Yeah.
I actually try not to read stuff because, like Bill Lawrence, one bad thing said and it'll just ruin my day, maybe my week. But I do, and I'm like one of the few people who's not on Twitter. But I do love the interaction. I love the idea that everyone is interacting with shows and like feel that they're a part of it now. There's so many different opinions, and someone might hate something and someone might love it, and I will only pay attention to the hate, so I have to stay away from it.
I have. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just find that I mean I'm on Twitter. I don't really. For me, it's kind of a one-way conversation. Like I'll put stuff out, or I think it's great to people want to see behind the scenes, or they want to But I don't really answer questions and stuff. I'm not good in that way. But I am amazed now at the level of dialogue about television. You read the recaps on Grantland or AV Club, or I mean everyone basically. We used to have Pauline Kael in the New Yorker talking about movies, and now. I mean, I worked really hard to build a lot of subtext and a lot of thematic work into the show, and I'm amazed at the level of, just the next day people have caught. They really pick everything up, and they're talking about things, and, there's such a sophistication to television now in the dialogue, and people really want to spend more than the hour that it takes to watch the show. They really want to think about it. And they want you to write a show that they can spend more time on, and that's really satisfying, I think.
How do you feel just sort of generally about the business model of television right now? Someone said to me the other day that the future is going to be more opportunities and less money. Is that how you see it? And just is the more opportunity, is that trade-off worth it?
Yeah, for me, I love it. I mean, yeah, moving from network to cable is a big, those residual checks don't look as good, but just the opportunity. Again, what we're talking about. I mean, to do fewer episodes, to really focus on those episodes is incredibly. You can really get intense there. You can really, I think, do some good stuff. And I mean,
But also more opportunities, meaning you can play to a smaller audience, the way Off-Broadway would function, that you didn't have to appeal to everybody. It didn't have to encompass, everyone didn't have to come into the tent, but there'd be a very specific audience for your show. And the networks would not frown upon that, or cable networks now, will embrace that, knowing that's a demographic that they want to reach. If it's a certain group, that's fine. That's a great relief.
Yeah, I just think that you're a lot more opened up creatively, because there's so many different possible ways to do a show. It used to be like, you were saying how, you can do a serialized show, and I remember that as well. And I always did serialized shows, and they just didn't like that I did them. And and then and I think with Netflix, it just changed. The idea of that. But then there's these other, so many other things like. Doing the limited series, it changes the way you have to think about, what a show is from the very beginning when you're thinking about creating a show. There are more possibilities. It doesn't have to be a show that has the same characters for 7 years, that you do X amount of episodes. It's also like that model also is great for being able to get talent, actors, on board to do something that you never would have gotten before, because they wouldn't, certain actors wouldn't make that commitment of time. And now you can say, well, it's 8 episodes, and and that's it. And so there's just so much more, I think, there's just so much more potential creatively.
You mentioned Julian Fellows earlier with Downton Abbey, and one of the business models that's interesting right now, particularly in overseas, is they use the word ownership, whereas we've all been contracted by studios that own the product. They come from a different place, and we're being approached now with writers actually owning the series, having a part ownership in it, which is an interesting term because we feel it creatively most of the time, but we never felt that, as far as production-wise, financially.
Do you think that the audience is demanding better products these days? That they demand more of us?
I do. I mean, I think, I've said this before, I think people used to read War and Peace and now they don't. And what they do is they sit around with their tablets or their whatever and they watch 4 episodes of Downton Abbey or Breaking Bad or whatever. And I think, that they want the things they watch to be better so they can feel better about themselves for watching it. You know what I mean? I mean, honestly, I feel like...
Oh, that Tolstoy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're like, well, I blew the weekend on Breaking Bad, but the quality of that show is so amazing that it's not like...
You're Married with Children marathon.
Yeah, it's not like, I watched Naked and Afraid 17 episodes, so... I think there is that's true, and it just happens to be at a moment where it's a great business model for all these new channels that need to distinguish themselves. The brand is quality now, which is different than it was.
There's so many choices. The idea of, when you're a member of the Academy now, how many Emmy tapes you get, I mean, compared to what it was, I don't know, 6 years ago even, that they just come every day, and it might not stop. It's sort of like a Fruit of the Month club where you always say, I don't want any more of these. I can't eat that much melon, take it back. But they just keep coming. There's more that came today. You can't even find your door because there's more. So there's so many choices. I think that alone, there's some, correlation there that there has to be equality because people are going to sample something, and if it's not good, they're not going to come back.
Well, you mentioned the ownership question, but is that going to be where every writer who does something like that is going to need a team of forensic accountants to find out if the show actually made any money?
And that's a good question. I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. You probably need a good attorney to start, and a good agent. But I think, I haven't been privy to this. This is what I'm told is the future. And I have friends who made a series, interesting slip, in Europe last year and did 10 episodes. And they were part owners of the product, having raised the money with 2 different companies, a Canadian and a French company. And I think their sense of, I don't think the investment changes that much emotionally, because once you're doing a show, it's your show, and you're not. But I think you're talking about a different business model that people in this room are going to face someday.
What about producing for pay cable are you most envious of? Is it the budgets? Is
Time.
it the time? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was scouring every True Detective, breakdown to figure out what they had. We shot, we had 7.5 days an episode. We block shot, so we had 15 days for 2. And we ended up shooting, our show will routinely last 50 minutes, so we have an extra act that we're shooting in basically half a day less than everyone else is shooting. And, True Detective, I did the math, they had 14 days an episode. They had literally twice what I had. And every time I saw those helicopter shots, or, whatever it was, it's like they had the time to really massage the performances and reshoot if they didn't like things. And, so that is an attractive part of it.
Yeah, and they really have longer in post also, which is huge.
I'm envious of their DVD mailers.
See? The nicest ones.
Velvet line, yeah.
Well, you mentioned time, but Noah, I wanted to ask you because your show kind of runs as long as it needs to run.
Yeah.
So if you have an episode that needs to go, 57 minutes.
I don't have a 42.5-minute episode. I mean,
Yeah.
the first episode is 68 minutes. The last episode is 63 minutes, I guess. And FX said, look, it should be however long the story is. And for the pacing of the storytelling, that was huge, because otherwise I would have had to cut story out of it, because there's a tension, and a drama to the pacing of the show, and it's cut in a different way. So, I think the shortest episode I have is 47 minutes or something like that, which Some people's DVRs cut you off. Some people are like, it's on at 10 o'clock at night. I can't stay up till 11:30 to watch your show. And you're like, well, so watch the rest in the morning. But that was a great part also of doing the show was I didn't have to worry about fitting it into a box. I just had to tell my story.
Content also. I'm very lucky with USA that they've really embraced, especially Graceland, because it's, we've got heroin and torture and rape. Characters welcome, right? I think I don't know. For a network show, is it a little tougher? I mean, is there still the old cliches about the network? I mean, are they really very specific in terms of the harder core stuff? Do you run into it?
I mean, at least in my personal experience, as far as developing Elementary and getting it going, it was kind of remarkable. I was prepared for lots of resistance. I mean, especially given the premise of our Sherlock Holmes story was that he's a recovering drug addict, and he's been down a lot of dark roads. But everybody got it. It was like I would go in sort of coiled and ready to defend or make a point and try to get ahead of an objection that somebody might or might not have. It was a very blessed process because I've had friends go through it with less tangled conceits and have more problems. So it was kind of nice. And sometimes, to what degree it's funny. I've read assessments of the show over the last couple of years, and sometimes they'll describe Johnny's performance as cable worthy or cable level, and the distinction always sounds so. You should be able to write your character however you want, whether you're on pay cable, basic. It's interesting to me that it's an adjective at this point, or that that's how you qualify what he's doing. But anyway, I digress. It's like I said, we're lucky enough to have a lot of support.
Is there a particular show on right now that you especially admire, or is there a show that you cannot imagine writing? A show that you watch, and as you watch it, you think, I just don't know how they do that show.
Is it completely cliche if I say Game of Thrones?
No.
I'm not caught up, so no. No, I mean, I love it. I mean, I'm so envious of, oh, they have dragons. We don't have dragons. We don't have a helicopter. We don't have a drone. But yeah, it's just the scope of it just blows me away. I started watching Black Sails, which I was also just the scope of it just really floored me. There's so many good shows on now. That's the crazy thing. I mean, I love Mad Men. I love Elementary. But one I would never want to work on, or is it not work on? I just couldn't see myself
just couldn't
writing?
imagine writing it.
Wow.
But then let's just go with the one that you went with Game of Thrones.
Sure, there we go. Done.
So a show that you particularly admire right now.
And maybe it's because I had Martin Freeman in my show, but the work that Stephen Moffat is doing on both Sherlock and those last couple of seasons of Doctor Who, I felt like there's an inventiveness to the storytelling where all the genres, he's doing things that I just haven't seen or thought of, or both on the sort of mystery front, and where you thought there were no new twists or turns, and then I love a good science fiction.
Can I change my answer?
Let's throw that
Sherlock,
into yeah.
And speaking of British shows, Luther was it's the most remarkable show I've seen in the last few years. It's when I settled in to watch it, I thought I had a sense of where it was headed, and it's just unlike anything I've watched previously or since. Neil Cross, I believe I'm blanking on the name, but he's incredible.
I have to say I'm a little. I don't have the. I'm not really sure. I think if there's a show that I'm. That I feel is that I have that incredible feeling about now, like I did with Breaking Bad when it was on. I've really been enjoying Veep. I think that's just a wonderful show, and I just think it's gotten better and better. I've enjoyed watching it as it sort of I feel like it's really coming to its own.
All right. Thank you very much, panel, and thank all of you for coming.